The cold air of the November night felt like a familiar friend to Julian. It didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. It was sharp, honest, and it bit at the exposed skin of his neck and wrists, a stark contrast to the cloying warmth of the diner he had just left. He stood under the flickering neon sign that buzzed eat into the darkness, the sound a tired, mechanical sigh. He watched her walk away, her silhouette shrinking down the cracked sidewalk until it was swallowed by the city's hazy glow. He had felt the shift, the precise moment the evening had fractured. It wasn't a loud shatter, but a quiet, clean break, like a hairline crack appearing in a frozen pane of glass. He replayed the moment in his mind, a masochistic habit he had developed over the years. Her name was Clara. She had a kind smile and eyes that seemed to hold a flicker of some old gentle sadness. They had talked for 2 hours, the conversation flowing with an ease that had almost made him forget the game he was playing. He had talked about books. She had talked about her love for gardening in the small patch of dirt behind her apartment building. For a fleeting, dangerous moment, he had felt like just a man, not a symbol, not a fortress built of money and suspicion. Then came the check. $15.43. He had paid with a crumpled 20, telling the waitress to keep the change, a small act of generosity that felt like a betrayal of the character he was playing. As they stood outside, the cold rushing in to fill the space between them, she had asked the inevitable question. "So, where did you park?" He had steeled himself. This was the test. This was always the test. "I don't have a car," he said, his voice even. "I took the bus here. Figured we could catch the 14A back toward your neighborhood." And then it happened. A sound escaped her lips. It wasn't a cruel laugh, not exactly. It was a short, surprised burst of air, tinged with something he couldn't quite decipher. Awkwardness, maybe even pity. But to his wounded sensibilities, it sounded like a judge's gavel. She had looked away, a blush creeping up her neck. "Oh, right. You know, it's getting really late. And I have an early morning. I think I'm just going to grab a cab." She had fumbled for her phone, her fingers moving quickly, her gaze fixed on the screen. She wouldn't look at him. She had ended the night early, the excuse flimsy and transparent. She had laughed. He couldn't even afford a car. The verdict was in. He was not enough. The old, familiar ache settled in his chest, a cold, heavy stone. It was a feeling of confirmation, as bitter and as necessary as medicine. This was why he did this, to remind himself that the walls he had built around his life, around his heart, were there for a reason. They were not a prison, they were a sanctuary. He turned his collar up against the wind and began the long walk to the bus stop, the lonely sound of his own footsteps echoing in the empty street. He felt the immense, crushing weight of his own wealth, a secret so large it felt like it was hollowing him out from the inside. He was Julian Croft, a man whose name was synonymous with automotive success across the state. Yet here he was, waiting for a city bus, feeling as worthless as she had made him feel. The experiment was a success, and it felt exactly like failure. The next morning, Clara was a bundle of frayed nerves and lukewarm coffee. Her daughter, 6-year-old Lily, was a whirlwind of mismatched socks and frantic energy beside her. "Mommy, are we going to be late?" "Miss Davison said we're painting today, and I want to get the blue paint before Leo takes it all." "We're not going to be late, sweet pea," Clara murmured, her voice tight. She was driving her sputtering 15-year-old hatchback, a car that seemed to run on sheer force of will and a prayer. Her mind was not on the traffic or the painting. It was on him. Julian. She felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck, the same blush from the night before. Her reaction had been awful. It wasn't that he didn't have a car. She didn't have a reliable one herself. It was the surprise, the sudden, jarring realization of their different worlds. She lived a life of careful budgets and stretched paychecks, where a cab ride was an indulgence she hadn't planned for. The date had felt so nice, so normal, and his confession had suddenly highlighted the precariousness of her own situation. Her laugh hadn't been at him. It had been a panicked, involuntary response to her own anxieties bubbling to the surface. It was the laugh of a woman who was tired of struggling and had, for a brief moment, allowed herself to hope for something easier. It was selfish, and she knew it. She had hurt a man who, for all she could tell, had a kind heart and a genuine soul. She had been so wrapped up in her own head that she'd acted terribly. He had probably walked away thinking she was some shallow, money-grubbing monster. The thought made her stomach clench. She had spent the night tossing and turning, composing and deleting a dozen different apology texts she didn't have the courage to send. What was his last name again? He'd never said. She had no way to find him, no way to explain. "Mommy, look, it's the car man." Lily's voice, high and clear, sliced through her thoughts. "What, honey?" Clara asked, distracted, glancing at the stoplight ahead. "The car man." On the big TV, Clara followed her daughter's pointing finger. They were stopped at the intersection bordering the largest auto mall in the city, a sprawling empire of glass and steel. And there, on a massive digital billboard that cycled through advertisements, was a face. His face. Julian's face. He was wearing a sharp, tailored suit, a confident, easy smile on his lips. Below his image, in bold, elegant letters, were the words, "Croft Automotive, a tradition of trust." And beneath that, Julian Croft, President, Clara's breath caught in her throat. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The sputtering engine of her old car, the worn upholstery, the smell of stale coffee, it all felt, suddenly, profoundly absurd. The man she had pitied, the man she had dismissed because he couldn't afford a car, didn't just own a car. He owned all of them. Thousands of them. The light turned green. A car behind her honked. A short, impatient blast. Clara's foot found the accelerator, but her mind was reeling. It wasn't shame she felt now. It was a confusing, dizzying cocktail of shock, indignation, and a strange, electric intrigue. He had been playing a game. He had been testing her. And she, in her own flawed, insecure way, had failed spectacularly. The thought didn't sit right. It wasn't fair. He had lied to her, a lie of omission so vast it was staggering. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. She dropped Lily at school, the kiss on her daughter's forehead more distracted than usual. All day, as she sorted files and answered phones at her mind-numbing temp job, the image of his face on that billboard burned behind her eyes. The confident smile in the ad versus the quiet, observant man in the diner. Who was the real Julian Croft? By the end of the day, a new feeling had pushed its way through the confusion. Anger. A cool, simmering anger. She deserved an explanation. She deserved to look him in the eye and ask him why. On her way to pick up Lily, she made a detour. She didn't know what she was going to say, but she knew she had to go. She pulled her rattling car into the pristine, sprawling parking lot of Croft Automotive, feeling like a dinghy pulling into a harbor of yachts. Holding Lily's hand tightly, she walked through the enormous glass doors. The showroom was cavernous, silent, and smelled of new leather and money. A slick-haired salesman in a suit that probably cost more than her rent immediately approached them. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked, his eyes flicking dismissively over her practical coat and worn boots before landing on Lily, a small, colorful disruption in this monochrome world. Clara lifted her chin. "I'm here to see Julian Croft." The salesman's eyebrow arched. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "But I believe he'll see me. Tell him it's Clara." The salesman looked skeptical, but retreated to a desk and picked up a phone, murmuring into it. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. What was she doing? This was insane. She was about to make a scene. She should just turn around and leave. But then, a door at the back of the showroom opened. And there he was. Not the man from the billboard, but the man from the diner. He was wearing simple dark jeans and a plain gray sweater. His hair was slightly rumpled, and his expression was one of guarded astonishment. He saw her, and his eyes widened. Then his gaze dropped to the small, bright-eyed girl holding her hand. Lily, utterly uninhibited by the opulence of the showroom or the tension in the air, let go of Clara's hand and took a few steps toward him. She pointed a small, determined finger. "You're the car man from the big TV," she announced, her voice echoing in the silent space. "But you look sadder here." The blunt, innocent observation seemed to shatter the atmosphere. The salesman choked back a laugh. Julian stared at the little girl, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He knelt, bringing himself down to her level. "Do I?" he asked, his voice soft. Lily nodded solemnly. "On the TV, you're like, hooray. Cars. Here, you're like..." She scrunched up her face in a perfect imitation of his guarded expression. People." A genuine, unpracticed smile touched Julian's lips. It transformed his face, chasing away the shadows. It was the smile she had been on the verge of seeing at the diner, before she had ruined everything. "You're a very observant young lady," he said to Lily. Then he looked up at Clara, his smile fading, replaced by that familiar, watchful caution. "Clara, what are you doing here?" "I think you know," she said, her anger returning, fueled by the absurdity of him kneeling on the polished floor of his palace, pretending to be a normal man. "We need to talk." Julian's gaze held hers for a long moment. He seemed to be weighing 1,000 options. Finally, he nodded slowly. He stood up and gestured toward the door he had come through. "My office." His office was nothing like the sterile showroom. It was warm and personal, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves crammed with worn paperbacks, not just business manuals. A large oak desk stood before a window that overlooked a small, private garden. It looked less like the office of a corporate president and more like the study of a reclusive professor. The only indication of his business was a collection of vintage model cars on a single shelf. Lily was immediately drawn to them. "Wow," she breathed, her face pressed against the glass display case. "You can look at them, if you'd like," Julian said gently. He unlocked the case and carefully handed her a heavy, die-cast model of a classic red convertible. Lily cradled it like a precious jewel and sat on a plush rug in the corner, making quiet vroom-vroom sounds. The silence that fell between the two adults was thick with unspoken words. Clara stood stiffly in the center of the room, her arms crossed. Julian leaned against the edge of his desk, his posture anything but presidential. He just looked tired. So, Clara began, her voice sharp. "Croft Automotive, a tradition of trust. Is that supposed to be ironic?" He winced, the barb hitting its mark. "Clara, about last night, no," she cut him off. "Let's not talk about last night. Let's talk about the lie. The game. What was it? Some kind of sick social experiment? See if the poor girl will fall for the poor boy before you reveal you're secretly a prince? Or were you just hoping I'd show my true colors so you could feel smug and superior?" He didn't get defensive. He just absorbed her anger, his expression pained. "It wasn't about you," he said quietly. "It was about me. It's a habit. A bad one." "A habit? Lying to people is a habit?" "Protecting myself is a habit," he corrected her. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of profound weariness. "Look, I know how it looks, and you have every right to be angry. I am so sorry for how I handled things. Sorry for pretending to be poor, or sorry you got caught?" "Sorry I hurt you," he said, and the sincerity in his voice gave her pause. "I never should have put you in that position. The test, it's not for the other person. It's for me. It's to prove a theory I have about the world. A theory that's been proven right, time and time again. That people only care about money?" She guessed, her anger beginning to soften into a grudging curiosity. He nodded. Among other things. That connection is transactional. That affection has a price tag. Last night, when you laughed, he looked away, toward the window. It just felt like confirmation. The shame washed over her again, stronger this time. I wasn't laughing at you, Julian, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I was laughing at myself. At the situation. I was embarrassed. It was a stupid, panicked reaction, and it was horrible of me. I came here to apologize for that. Before I knew about all, she gestured vaguely around the expensive office. This. He turned back to her, his eyes searching her face, trying to see if she was telling the truth. The silence stretched, broken only by Lily's happy murmuring as she drove the toy car over the intricate patterns of the rug. I don't get it, Clara said, shaking her head. You have all this. Why would you pretend to be someone you're not? Why would you put yourself through that? Julian was quiet for a long time. He walked over to the window and stared out at the meticulously landscaped garden, his back to her. A few years ago, he began, his voice low and strained. I was engaged. Her name was Victoria. I thought she was the love of my life. I gave her everything, a house, cars, a limitless credit card. I thought I was showing her I loved her. What I was actually doing was paying for a service. He paused, and Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. The week before our wedding, she disappeared. She'd cleared out our joint accounts. Took jewelry, art, anything that wasn't nailed down. She left a note. It said, "Thank you for the seed money. I found an investor with a better return." She saw me as a business opportunity, one she had just cashed out. The clinical cruelty of the words sent a chill down Clara's spine. Her own anger felt petty and insignificant now. After that, Julian continued, I couldn't look at anyone the same way. Every smile seemed calculated. Every compliment felt like an appraisal. The money, the name, it wasn't a blessing. It was a lens that distorted everything. I couldn't tell if someone liked me, or what I could do for them. So, I started the experiments. I'd go to places where no one knew me. Diners, libraries, bus stations. I'd dress like this. He gestured to his simple clothes. And I'd see how people treated a man with nothing. Most of the time, they didn't see me at all. He finally turned to face her, and the look in his eyes was so raw, so full of profound loneliness, that it made her chest ache. Then, I met you. And for 2 hours, I forgot I was playing a game. We were just talking. It felt real, so when the test came, and you reacted the way you did, it hurt more than all the other times combined. Because I had actually started to hope. The confession hung in the air between them, fragile and devastating. Clara felt the last of her anger dissolve, replaced by a wave of empathy so powerful it almost knocked her off her feet. He wasn't a manipulative prince. He was a wounded man, hiding in a fortress of his own making, desperately peering through the battlements to see if there was anyone trustworthy outside. Julian, she said softly, I'm so sorry. Before he could respond, a small voice piped up from the corner. Are you going to be my new daddy? Both adults froze, turning to stare at Lily. She was looking from Julian to Clara and back again, the red toy car held expectantly in her hands. Her expression was one of pure, simple curiosity. Clara's face flooded with color. Lily, honey, you can't just ask people that. I'm so sorry, she said, rushing toward Julian. But Julian wasn't offended. He was staring at Lily, a slow, wondrous smile spreading across his face. It was the first truly unguarded expression she had seen from him. The question, so innocent and direct, had bypassed all his defenses. It wasn't about money or status. It was a question about connection, about family, about belonging. He knelt down again in front of the little girl. Well, he said, his voice thick with an emotion Clara couldn't name, Your mommy and I only just met. These things usually take a little time. Lily considered this with the gravity of a seasoned diplomat. Okay, she said. But can we come back and play with the cars again tomorrow? Julian looked up at Clara, a silent question in his eyes. Hope, fear, and a desperate plea all mingled in his gaze. He was leaving the door to his fortress cracked open, waiting to see if she would slam it shut or dare to step inside. Clara looked at this man, this strange, sad, wealthy, lonely man. And she looked at her daughter, who saw him not as a president or a pauper, but simply as a person who looked sad and needed a friend. Her own life was complicated and hard, but it was honest. His was opulent and easy, but it was built on a lie. Maybe, she thought, they had something to offer each other. We'll see, sweet pea, she said to Lily. Then, her eyes meeting Julian's, she added, maybe it wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. For Julian Croft, who had lived in a world of absolutes, the possibility inherent in that single word felt like a revolution. That maybe bloomed into something real. Julian didn't push. He didn't shower her with gifts or grand gestures. Instead, he did something far more surprising. A week later, he called her. I have a proposition for you, he said, his voice hesitant over the phone, and I swear it's not a trick. Clara was wary. Okay, the garden, he said, the one outside my office. It's a mess. My father loved it, but since he passed, no one's really taken care of it. You mentioned you love gardening. I was wondering, I'd like to hire you to bring it back to life. Good pay, flexible hours. You can bring Lily. It's quiet and private. The offer was absurd. A multi-millionaire asking his temp agency date to be his personal gardener. But Clara understood what it was. It wasn't a job offer. It was an invitation. It was a way for them to exist in the same space without the pressure of dating, a way for him to see her and Lily in a natural environment and for her to see him. It was a neutral ground. Okay, Julian, she said, a small smile playing on her lips. I'll do it. And so, a strange and wonderful routine began. Several afternoons a week, Clara would arrive at the imposing glass building of Croft Automotive, and she and Lily would be escorted back to Julian's private garden. While Clara worked, pulling weeds, turning soil, and planning what to plant, Lily would sit on a blanket on the grass, playing with the model cars Julian brought out for her or helping her mom by digging in the dirt with a small trowel. Julian would often join them. He'd shed his suit jacket, roll up his sleeves, and sit on the steps leading down from his office, watching them. Sometimes he would talk, asking Clara about different plants, telling her stories about his father who had planted the original rose bushes. Other times, he would be quiet, content to just be in their presence, the sound of Lily's laughter and Clara's quiet humming a balm to his solitary world. In these quiet afternoons, Clara saw the real Julian, not the pauper, not the president, just the man, a man who was shy and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that only came out when he felt safe. A man who was endlessly patient with her daughter, answering her 1,000 questions with solemn sincerity. He listened when Clara talked about her struggles as a single mother, about her dreams of one day having a small house with a real yard. He never offered to fix her problems with money. He just listened. And in listening, he made her feel seen in a way no one had in a very long time. One afternoon, as a light rain began to fall, they took shelter inside his office. Lily fell asleep on the plush rug, her cheek pillowed on her arm. Clara was toweling her hair dry with a towel Julian had produced, and he was making them both tea. You know, Clara said softly, watching him, you're nothing like I expected. He turned from the small kitchenette in the corner of his office, 2 mugs in his hands. Good or bad? Good, she admitted. I thought a man with all this would be arrogant, detached. But you're gentle. He handed her a mug. his fingers brushing against hers. The small touch sent a jolt of warmth through her. He sat not at his desk, but in the armchair across from her. "I think you and Lily are reminding me of a part of myself I thought was gone," he confessed, his gaze dropping to the sleeping child on the floor. "Before Victoria, before I inherited all this, I was just a guy who liked to read books and fix old engines with my dad. Life was simpler." "It still can be," she said. "The money doesn't have to be a fortress, Julian. It can be a tool. You could do so much good with it." He looked at her, a flicker of the old cynicism in his eyes. "Every time I've tried, people just see the money. They don't see the intention behind it." "Maybe you've been showing it to the wrong people," she countered gently. The bond between them deepened with each passing week. The garden began to flourish under Clara's care, new life sprouting from the neglected earth. It felt like a metaphor for what was happening to Julian's own heart. He started smiling more. He stopped testing the world and started living in it, at least in the small, safe world he had created with Clara and Lily. He found himself looking forward to their afternoons more than any business deal or board meeting. They were the highlight of his day, a splash of vibrant color in his monochrome life. But the outside world, with its sharp edges and harsh realities, could not be kept at bay forever. Julian's high profile meant he had rivals. The most dangerous among them was a man named Marcus Thorne. Thorne was everything Julian wasn't: flashy, ruthless, and utterly amoral. He saw business as a battlefield and believed in winning at any cost. He had been trying to undermine Croft Automotive for years, and he saw Julian's newfound happiness as a weakness to be exploited. Thorne had been watching. He had his people follow Julian. He knew about the quiet gardener and her little girl. He saw the way Julian's face softened when they were around, and he formulated a plan. One afternoon, as Clara was leaving the dealership, a sleek black sedan pulled up beside her rattling hatchback. The tinted window slid down, revealing a man with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his cold reptilian eyes. "Clara." "Is it?" he said, his voice smooth as oil. "I'm Marcus Thorne, a colleague of Julian's. I wonder if I might have a word with you." Clara's hand tightened on Lily's. "I'm sorry, I don't know you." "Oh, but I feel like I know you," Thorne said, his smile widening. "You're the woman who's finally managed to capture the attention of our city's most eligible and most eccentric bachelor, quite a feat. I'm just concerned he hasn't been entirely honest with you about the scope of his influence." He slid a glossy folder out the window. "A little light reading. You seem like a smart woman. I think you should know exactly who you're dealing with. Julian doesn't just play games with his heart, he plays them with people's lives." Hesitantly, Clara took the folder. Thorne's smile was predatory. "You have a lovely daughter," he said, his eyes lingering on Lily for a moment too long. It would be a shame if she got caught in the crossfire of Julian's complicated world. The window slid up, and the car purred away, leaving Clara standing in the parking lot, a cold dread seeping into her bones. That night, after she put Lily to bed, Clara opened the folder. It was filled with documents, financial statements, property deeds, articles about Croft Automotive's aggressive expansion, which had driven smaller, family-owned dealerships out of business. Thorne had curated it all to paint a picture of Julian not as a wounded man, but as a ruthless corporate shark. The wealth she had seen in his office was just the tip of the iceberg. The documents detailed a vast empire worth hundreds of millions. It was overwhelming. The scale of it was dizzying. But what truly shook her was a section at the back. It contained details of Julian's experiments. Thorne had somehow gotten testimonials from waitresses, bartenders, and others who had encountered Julian in his poor man disguise. It was all twisted to sound cruel and manipulative, a rich man mocking the working class for his own amusement. Clara felt sick. Was this the man she had been letting into her life, into her daughter's life? The trust she had so carefully been building crumbled into dust. It wasn't just the money, it was the deception. The lie wasn't a single event, It was a lifestyle. The man in the diner, the man in the garden, were they all just roles he was playing? The next day, she went to the dealership. She didn't bring Lily. She found Julian in the garden waiting for them. He smiled when he saw her, a smile that died when he saw her expression. Clara? What's wrong? Where's Lily? She threw the folder onto the small stone table between them. This is what's wrong, she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. Who are you, Julian? Are you the man who talks about books with me? Or are you the man in this folder who crushes people for a living? Julian paled as he looked at the open folder. He saw Thorne's fingerprints all over it. Clara, this is not what it looks like. He's twisting everything. Is it a lie? She demanded, her voice rising. Is it a lie that you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars? Is it a lie that your company has put people out of business? Is it a lie that you go around playing these sick, secret shopper games with people's lives? It's more complicated than that. No, it's not. She cried, tears welling in her eyes. It's simple. You either trust someone or you don't. And you don't trust anyone. You let me into this little bubble, this garden, but it's just another part of the fortress, isn't it? A more pleasant-looking cage. You let me come here and work for you, feeling sorry for my little life, while you could buy my entire apartment building with the money in your pocket right now. That's not what it was. He insisted, stepping toward her. It was never about that. It was about us. It was real. What was real? She asked, her voice breaking. How can I know? Every time I look at you now, all I'll see is the lie, the test. I'll always be wondering if I'm passing. I can't live like that, and I won't let my daughter live like that. The pain in his face was immense. Clara, please, don't let him do this to us. This is what he wants. There is no ooses, she said, the words feeling like shards of glass in her mouth. There's just you and your money and your walls. And I need you to leave us alone. She turned and walked away, not looking back. She walked out of the garden, through the silent showroom, and out of his life. Each step was an agony. She had let herself hope again, and the fall back to reality was crushing. She had been a fool to believe a fairy tale could be real. Julian stood frozen in the garden, the folder lying open on the table, like an indictment. Her words echoed in the sudden, deafening silence. I need you to leave us alone. It was a rejection more profound and more painful than Victoria's. Victoria had taken his money. Clara was taking his heart. He sank onto the steps, the beautiful, flourishing garden suddenly feeling like a funeral wreath. The cold stone of the fortress walls rose up around him again, higher and thicker than ever before. Thorne had won. He had lost her. And in that moment of absolute despair, Julian Croft believed he had lost himself, too. He was alone, truly and utterly alone, in the gilded cage he had built for himself. The days that followed were a gray, featureless expanse of misery for Julian. He retreated completely. He stopped going to the garden, leaving it to wither under the unblinking eye of the autumn sun. He spent his days locked in his office and his nights in his vast, empty house, the silence of which was now a roaring accusation. The place had never felt like a home, but now it felt like a tomb, a monument to his failure. He was right back where he started, only worse. Before, he had only suspected he was unlovable. Now, he had proof. He had let Clara and Lily in, and in doing so, he had exposed them to the poison in his own life. His cynicism, his games, his wealth, it had all combined to hurt the only two people who had made him feel whole. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. He drank, not with the flair of a heartbroken man in a movie, but with a grim, methodical determination. He drank expensive scotch that tasted like ash, hoping to numb the part of his brain that kept replaying Clara's face, twisted in pain and betrayal. He was a fool. a coward who hid behind his money and then hid from it, all at the same time. He had created a test that was impossible to pass, because the flaw was not in the people he was testing, but in the test itself and in the man who administered it. Meanwhile, Marcus Thorne was not idle. With Julian emotionally crippled and retreating from the world, Thorne saw his opportunity not just to wound his rival, but to destroy him. He decided to twist the knife. He didn't want to just separate Julian from Clara, he wanted to salt the earth of Julian's life, to make it impossible for anything good to ever grow there again. Thorne was a man who understood leverage, and he knew Julian's greatest vulnerability was no longer his business, but the gardener and her child. He made an anonymous call. 2 days after Clara had quit, there was a sharp, official knock on her apartment door. When she opened it, she found a stern-faced woman and a weary-looking man, both holding badges. They were from Child Protective Services. "Miss Clara Evans?" the woman asked, her eyes scanning the small, clean, but admittedly cramped apartment. "We've received a report expressing concern for the welfare of your daughter Lily." Clara's blood ran cold. "Concern? What kind of concern?" "Lily is happy. She's healthy. She's everything to me." "The report mentions an unstable environment," the man said, flipping through a notepad, "association with an individual of questionable character. It also notes your financial difficulties and questions your ability to provide adequate care." The words were so clinical, so detached, yet they struck Clara like a physical blow. She felt the floor drop out from under her. Unstable? Who said this? Who would say these things? The woman gave her a look that was a mixture of professional sympathy and procedural suspicion. "The source is anonymous, miss. We're just obligated to investigate. We'll need to ask you some questions. And we'll need to speak with Lily." The interview was a nightmare. They asked about her job, her income, her ex-husband who was long gone and offered no support. They asked about her friends, her family. And then they asked about Julian. The questions were loaded, clearly fed to them by someone who knew the situation. "So you were recently employed by Mr. Julian Croft?" "Yes, as a gardener." "And what was the nature of your relationship?" "He was my employer." "Just your employer?" The report suggests a more complicated involvement, one that ended abruptly. "Is Mr. Croft the individual of questionable character mentioned in the report?" Clara's mind reeled. She saw the trap. If she defended Julian, she was admitting to a close relationship with a man they were being told was dangerous. If she condemned him, she was validating their claims. They were using her own pain and anger against her. And worse, they were using it against Lily. The thought that someone, Thorne, it had to be Thorne, would stoop so low as to threaten to take her child away, just to get at Julian, was monstrous. It was an evil beyond her comprehension. The interview with Lily was even worse. They took her into her small bedroom and spoke with her alone. Clara was forced to sit in her living room, her hands clenched into fists, her ears straining to hear. She could hear Lily's small, confused voice and the low, calm tones of the caseworkers. It was the longest 20 minutes of her life. When they emerged, their faces were grim. "Miss Evans," the woman said, "Lily seems like a very sweet girl. But she did talk about a man who owns a lot of cars, who has a secret garden, and who her mother was very angry with. Combined with the other factors, we feel it's necessary to schedule a formal hearing. Until then, we'll be making regular, unannounced visits." The threat was clear. They were building a case to take her daughter away. When they finally left, Clara sank onto her worn sofa, her body trembling. The anger she had felt at Julian was nothing compared to the terror that now gripped her. This was out of her league. She was a single mom with a temp job and a broken-down car. They were talking about courtrooms and hearings. She had no money for a lawyer. She had no one. Despair, cold and absolute, settled over her. She looked around her small apartment, a home she had filled with love and warmth, and saw it through their eyes. Small, old, not enough. She saw herself through their eyes. Struggling, unstable, not enough. She had tried so hard to build a safe world for her daughter, and now it was all about to be shattered because she had stumbled into the orbit of a rich, sad man and his vicious rival. She put her head in her hands and began to sob, not with anger, but with the raw, terrifying fear of a mother about to lose her child. She was alone. She was powerless. And then a thought pierced through her despair. It wasn't true. She wasn't entirely alone. There was one person who had the power to fight this. One person who, for all his flaws and all his lies, was at the center of this nightmare. One person who, she realized with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty, would understand the stakes. Despite the lie, despite the hurt, a deeper truth remained. Julian was a good man. A wounded man, a foolish man, but a good one. He would never, ever let something happen to Lily. Her hands shaking, she picked up her phone. Her pride was gone, incinerated by her fear. This wasn't about her feelings anymore. This was about her daughter. She found his number and her thumb hovered over the call button. She closed her eyes, took a ragged breath, and pressed it. Julian was staring into a glass of amber liquid when his phone buzzed on the polished surface of his bar. He ignored it. It was probably his COO, or his sister, or someone else calling to check on him. He didn't want to talk. He wanted to dissolve. It buzzed again, and again. The sheer persistence of it broke through his stupor. Annoyed, he snatched it up, ready to bark at whoever was on the other end. He looked at the screen. Clara. His heart stopped. He stared at her name, his thumb frozen over the screen. 1,000 emotions warred within him. Hope, terror, shame, longing. He finally answered, his voice a raw croak. Clara? Julian, her voice was small, tight, and frayed with panic. She was crying. He could hear it. Julian, I need help. The sound of her distress was like a bucket of ice water. It shocked him out of his self-pity instantly. What is it? What's wrong? Are you okay? Is Lily okay? It's Lily, she sobbed, and the words sent a spear of pure dread through his chest. They came. Child Protective Services. Someone made a report. A false report. They're talking about hearings, about taking her away from me. Oh God, Julian, they're going to take my little girl. He was on his feet in an instant, the fog of alcohol completely gone, replaced by a surge of adrenaline so fierce it made his vision sharpen. He knew, with absolute certainty, who was behind this. Thorne. This was Thorne's doing. He had crossed a line that Julian hadn't even known existed. He had targeted a child. Where are you? Julian's voice was different now. The hesitant, wounded man was gone. In his place was someone cold, focused, and incandescent with rage. I'm at home, she whispered. Don't move, he commanded. Don't talk to anyone. Don't open your door. I'm coming. I will fix this, Clara. I swear to you on my life, I will fix this. He hung up the phone, and for a moment, he stood in the center of his vast, empty living room, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The fortress he had built to protect his heart was useless. It couldn't protect the people he loved. But the fortress wasn't just made of walls. It was made of power, of influence, of resources. And for the first time in years, Julian Croft was not ashamed of his wealth. He was not afraid of it. He was going to wield it like a weapon. He made 3 calls. The first was to David Chen, his personal lawyer and the most feared litigator in the state. David, he said, his voice like ice, clear your schedule. We have a family law case, pro bono, and I want you to bring the entire firm to bear on it. No holds barred. The second call was to a man named Gable, a discreet and ruthlessly efficient private investigator he kept on an unofficial retainer. Gable, Marcus Thorne, I want everything. I want his financials, his associates, his vices. I want to know where every dollar he's ever made came from and where it went. I want every skeleton in his closet exhumed and cataloged. I don't care what it costs or what you have to do. Get it done. The third call was to his head of security. Lock down the Croft Automotive building. Full security protocol. And I want a 4-man team at this address. Now, he read Clara's address into the phone. They are to be invisible. But nothing and no one gets near that apartment building without you knowing about it. He moved with a purpose he hadn't felt in years. He shed the simple clothes he had come to favor and pulled on the armor he had long since discarded. A perfectly tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, a dark silk tie. As he straightened the knot in the mirror, he looked at his own reflection. The sad, lonely man was gone. In his place was Julian Croft, president of Croft Automotive, but this time it wasn't a mask. It was a tool. He wasn't hiding behind the power anymore. He was embracing it. He was using it to protect his family. The thought hit him with the force of a physical blow. His family. He grabbed his car keys and strode out of his house, not as a man running from his life, but as a man running toward it. The fight was on, and Marcus Thorne was about to find out what it meant to threaten the king of the jungle when he finally remembered he was a lion. When Julian arrived at Clara's apartment building, his sleek, dark sedan was a stark anomaly on the street of aging family cars. He saw the subtle presence of his security team, a man reading a newspaper in a parked car, another walking a dog he clearly didn't own. They were ghosts, just as he'd ordered. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding with a rhythm that was equal parts fury and fear. He knocked on her door. "Clara, it's me. It's Julian." The door opened a crack, then swung wide. She stood there, her face pale and stained with tears. She looked small and fragile, and the sight of her so broken by this ignited a fresh, white-hot blaze of anger in his chest. Without a word, she collapsed into his arms, sobbing against his chest. He held her tightly, one hand stroking her hair. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice low and steady. "I'm here. It's going to be okay. I will not let him take her from you." She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "How can you be so sure? Because men like Thorne, they're bullies," he said, his eyes hard as flint. "They prey on people they think are weak. They expect you to cry and to crumble. They don't expect a fight. And I am going to give him a war." He stepped inside, and his gaze fell on Lily. She was sitting on the sofa, clutching a teddy bear, her eyes wide and scared. He walked over and knelt in front of her, the way he had that first day in the showroom. "Hey there, Ladybug," he said softly. "Mommy was crying," Lily whispered, her lower lip trembling. "The mean people said they might take me away." Julian's heart broke. He reached out and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. "Listen to me, Lily. No one is ever going to take you away from your mommy. Ever. Do you understand? Some bad people were playing a very mean trick. But the trick is over now. I'm here, and I don't let people hurt my friends." The simple certainty in his voice seemed to calm her. She nodded, her grip on the teddy bear loosening slightly. He stood and turned to Clara. His lawyer, David Chen, was already on his way. The investigator was already digging. The machine was in motion. First thing tomorrow, David will file a motion to have this case thrown out for malicious intent. He'll also file for a restraining order against Thorne on behalf of you and Lily. Clara stared at him, overwhelmed. "Julian, I can't afford. This has nothing to do with money," he said, cutting her off gently. "This is about what's right. This happened because of me. I will see it finished." He looked around the small apartment, not with judgment, but with a fierce protectiveness. "And you're not staying here tonight. It's not safe. You and Lily are coming with me." She hesitated. "Julian, I can't. Clara, he said, his voice soft but firm, leaving no room for argument. You told me to leave you alone. And I did. Now I'm telling you, you have to let me help. You have to trust me. Not the man with the money. Trust the man who is telling you right now that he would do anything to keep you and your daughter safe. Please, she looked into his eyes, and she saw it there. The raw, unvarnished truth. This wasn't a game. This wasn't a test. This was real. This was a man fighting for the people he loved. She nodded, a single, decisive movement. Okay. The legal battle was swift and brutal. David Chen was a master of his craft, and fueled by the limitless resources and righteous fury of his client, he was a force of nature. He tore apart the anonymous report, exposing it as a tissue of lies and malicious innuendo. He presented evidence of Clara's character, glowing testimonials from Lily's teachers, from her neighbors, from former colleagues. Meanwhile, Gable's investigation into Marcus Thorne was bearing fruit. Thorne, it turned out, had built his empire on a foundation of corruption, blackmail, and fraud. Gable uncovered evidence of illegal importing schemes, tax evasion on a massive scale, and even proof that Thorne had blackmailed a city official to get zoning permits approved. The day of the hearing arrived. Clara was terrified, but Julian was a rock beside her. He held her hand as they walked into the courthouse, shielding her from the prying eyes of the press that Thorne had undoubtedly tipped off. Inside the judge's chambers, Thorne's lawyer, a smug, overconfident man, began to lay out the case against Clara. But before he could get far, David Chen stood up. Your Honor, he said, his voice ringing with authority. We are not here today to debate the fitness of my client, a devoted and loving mother. We are here because of a criminal abuse of the system by a man named Marcus Thorne. He then proceeded to systematically dismantle the case before dropping his own bombshell. He presented the judge with a thick file. This is a preliminary file from a private investigation into Mr. Thorne. It details numerous financial crimes. As we speak, this file is being delivered to the district attorney's office and the ears. The anonymous tip that started this entire nightmare has already been traced back to a burner phone purchased by one of Mr. Thorne's known associates. The color drained from the face of Thorne's lawyer. The judge's expression went from weary to thunderous. The case against Clara was not just dismissed, it was expunged with extreme prejudice, and the judge ordered an immediate investigation into Marcus Thorne for perjury, harassment, and abuse of process. It was over. Just like that. The threat was gone. As they walked out of the courthouse into the bright sunlight, Clara felt like she could breathe for the first time in days. She turned to Julian, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You did it. No, he said, turning to face her. We did it. A week later, the news broke. Marcus Thorne had been arrested. His assets were frozen. His empire was crumbling. He was ruined, completely and utterly. Julian had not just won the battle, he had ended the war. That evening, Julian took Clara and Lily back to the garden. It was the first time they had been there since their fight. The setting sun cast long shadows across the lawn, and the flowers Clara had planted were in full, glorious bloom. Lily ran through the grass, chasing fireflies, her laughter echoing in the twilight. Julian and Clara stood on the stone steps, watching her. I was so wrong, Clara said softly, not looking at him. About you. No, he said. You were right. I was hiding. I was a coward. I was so afraid of being hurt again that I hurt you. I let my past poison my present. I am so sorry, Clara, for everything. You saved us, Julian. You saved me, he countered, his voice thick with emotion. You and Lily, you walked into my life and you reminded me that there was good in the world. You made me want to be a better man. I was just too afraid to try. He finally turned to her, his heart in his eyes. I'm not afraid anymore. He took her hand. I love you, Clara. I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment you told me you liked to get your hands dirty in the garden. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you see the world. And I love your daughter as if she were my own. Tears streamed freely down Clara's face, but this time, they were tears of joy. "I love you too, Julian," he smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached his eyes and made them shine. "Good," he said. "In that case, I have another proposition for you." He reached into his pocket and knelt down on one knee, right there on the stone steps of the garden she had brought back to life. He opened a small velvet box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring with a single, perfect diamond that sparkled in the dying light. "Clara Evans," he said, his voice shaking just slightly. "I don't have a big speech. I just know that my life was black and white before you, and now it's in full color. I don't want to ever go back to the gray. Will you marry me? Will you and Lily be my family?" She was laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and as he stood to kiss her, Lily came running up to them, her face glowing. "Did you ask her to be your wife?" she demanded. Julian laughed, scooping her up into his arms. "I did," he said, kissing her forehead. "So you can be my daddy now?" she asked, her voice filled with hope. Julian looked over Lily's head at Clara, his eyes full of a love so profound it took her breath away. "Yeah," he said. "I think I can." 2 years later, the world was a different place. Julian and Clara stood on the porch of their new home, a beautiful but not ostentatious house with a large, rambling yard, watching Lily, now 8 years old, chase their new golden retriever across the lawn. The house was filled with light, laughter, and the happy chaos of family life. Julian's lonely mansion had been sold, its sterile rooms and painful memories traded for this place of warmth and love. They had revisited the diner from their first date, arriving in a comfortable family SUV, Lily chattering in the back seat. They had sat in the same booth, and when the check came, Julian had paid with a simple credit card, and they had both laughed, a shared, easy sound that held no memory of the pain, only the absurdity of their beginning. Julian had not abandoned his company, but he had transformed it. Inspired by Clara, he had established the Croft Family Foundation, a massive charitable organization dedicated to supporting single mothers and underprivileged children. He used his wealth and influence not as a shield, but as a force for good, finding more purpose in funding a new women's shelter than he ever had in acquiring a new dealership. He still ran his business, but his priorities had shifted. His real work, his most important work, began when he came home each night. Clara had found her calling as well. She ran the horticultural program for the foundation, creating community gardens in low-income neighborhoods, teaching people how to grow their own food, and bringing green, living beauty to forgotten corners of the city. She had a purpose that was all her own, a partnership with her husband that was built on mutual respect and shared dreams. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the yard, Julian wrapped his arms around Clara from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their daughter play. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "The quiet? The solitude?" Julian thought for a moment, remembering the profound, aching silence of his old life. He remembered the loneliness he had mistaken for peace, the isolation he had mistaken for strength. He looked at the vibrant, noisy, beautiful life they had built together, a life forged in the crucible of a lie, but rebuilt on a foundation of unshakable truth. "No," he said, his voice full of quiet conviction as he kissed her temple. "I was never hiding from the world. I was just waiting for you to come and find me."